Hi, I've mentioned in a previous video about the importance of change and managing change if you're going to be a great leader. And I've also mentioned, I'm sorry to harp on it, that change is absolutely part of the future. It's what we can look forward to more than anything else. So I thought I'd talk now, just for a couple of minutes, about managing effective change within an organisation. Now, I'm not going to be talking about the formal management of change. That change management is often captured in enterprise agreements, and there's very formal steps to follow. A release of early documents, consultation with staff, the release of final documents, and involvement of unions often, and making sure that all thorough consultation of staff occurs before you reach your final change position. So refer to your enterprise agreements or HR when it comes to that. No, I thought instead I'd talk more generally about managing change even when there is quite small changes. It isn't a dirty great change management document that you require in your organisation or your department, but you as a leader want to effect some change and you want to make sure that it occurs efficiently, effectively, and you don't get too much resistance for it. Okay, well, I think, as always, as a leader, change management is just part of it. As always, you need to have a clear vision. You've got to be very clear why you want this change, and you've got to understand the rationale behind it. A good leader also, just by the way, has a really good knowledge of the history and the personnel. So you don't just walk in and say, I've got a great idea, I'm the leader with the vision and we'll change it this way. If, as it turns out, because you're new, you didn't realise that they just came from that position a year before or 6 months before, or other people came from another department that had gone through this similarly or differently with different outcomes, good outcomes or bad outcomes, you need to know your history, you need to know your personnel, and you need to be very clear with your vision and your rationale. Then I think, as with all good leadership and all good management, you need a plan. You need a plan with timelines. What are you trying to effect? What change do you require? By when? And then the rest of this video, I thought I'd share a few little tricks that aren't really secret tricks, but I have found them to be really useful. And importantly, I've watched people not use the full bag of tricks that they actually have to their disposal. And that is, how do you get people to take on board change? There might be some resistance, it might be important for them to own it, or it might be important for you to have it your way in a particular spot, a particular issue. The first thing I should say is, if you're the sort of leader that has to have it your way all the time, you're not a very good leader. You should be inviting feedback for many decisions, but occasionally, for political reasons or other reasons, you want to effect a change that has to be your way. You've got to admit that there's a compromise immediately, that you are not getting ownership from everybody else in the team. And other times, it might be the flavour of the coffee or the colour of the walls or various other things that you're absolutely relaxed about it not being your way. You need the change, you want to be clear with the change, but ownership by all your team is much more important than it being your way. Can you see this continuum here? Your way, but you lose the ownership of the team. Or the ownership of the team, which is great and affects great management if it's genuine ownership, but of course they might come up with a solution, a direction of change that isn't going to be your way as a leader. Of course, it isn't a dichotomous choice like that. You actually do have a lot of steps along the way, and here are some hints. A, rarely use it my way or the highway. Rarely use it. If you use it very sparingly, people will be understanding and will put up with it on a few occasions. So you should rarely use that. 2, why not ask a committee charged with your specific vision to come up with the change management? Okay, what about that committee? Who decided what was on the committee? Perhaps you could put a few people on that committee. Perhaps you could let the whole group decide who's on the committee. Again, it depends on how important it is for the team to own the decisions, the change management process, and how important it is for you to be largely getting your way. Okay, you could appoint the chair and let the rest of the group choose the committee. You could salt the committee with certain people that understand at least the sorts of ideas that you want. You could put out a discussion paper that leads some of the direction, but then leads it to the team after that. Of course, you don't need a committee, but there's a whole lot of possibilities right there to help affect change. I often think that it's a continuum that goes from telling people, this is the decision we've made, terribly sorry you haven't had any input. Again, don't do that very often. To selling the idea and seeing the feedback, to coaching the idea, going to various groups, having forums, chatting to people and coaching people through it. Can you see what we're going all the way through to letting people make the entire decision themselves? And then there's a couple more tricks. Even if you've come up with a decision, perhaps by committee, perhaps by coaching, selling or telling, and you've come up with a decision and you know that there are some people that are still a little bit resistant, why not use trials? Why not put some timelines and say, we'll just trial this and I'll continue getting feedback? So can you see that in the change management arena, when managers and leaders often think, oh my goodness me, this is going to be terrible. I'm going to have some people that are going to be angry. I'm going to get resistance and it's really hard to create change. Actually, a good leader, a good manager has lots of different options to them, and using that in the right balanced way often brings on board better ideas, brings on board ownership by the team, and I think creates a much better environment to affect the change that you're after. Good luck.